Good morning. Today we're going to read What's Your Story, Amelia Earhart? Written by Jen Barton, illustrated by Doug Jones. Here's our table of contents that shows everything we're going to cover when we read our book today. Hi friends. Today I'm talking to Amelia Earhart. She is one of the world's most famous pilots. Amelia, we'd love to learn more about your life. Would you tell us about yourself? Amelia says, "Of course. In 1928, I became the first woman to fly across the Atlantic Ocean. I was a passenger in a plane called Friendship. Then, in 1932, I crossed the Atlantic by plane again, this time by myself. I was the pilot, co-pilot, and navigator. I flew from Newfoundland in Canada and landed in Northern Ireland. It was risky, but I had to follow my dreams. I also wanted to prove that women could be great pilots just like men." When and where were you born? Amelia says, "I was born in Atchison, Kansas in 1897. At that time and place, girls weren't expected to be adventurous. They were expected to stay home and be obedient. But I loved adventure. I wanted an exciting life, like characters I'd read about in books. I didn't see my first plane until I was 12 years old. Planes weren't common in the early 1900s. In 1920, I finally rode in a plane myself, and once I did, I was hooked. I knew I wanted to be a pilot." How did you learn to fly? Amelia says, "I started taking lessons from a great female pilot named Nita Snook. My parents agreed that I could learn to fly if I had a female instructor. I took a job in the mailroom of a phone company to help pay for my lessons. The lessons were expensive, but they were worth it. Nita taught me everything she knew. We became close friends. Soon I wanted a plane I could call my own. I saved up my money and bought one that was painted bright yellow. I named my plane Canary." How was flying in your time different than it is today? Amelia says, "When I flew, airplanes had been around for only a few years. Planes were smaller, and many cockpits were open to the sky. Sometimes I wore goggles to protect my eyes from the wind. Safety was a main focus for engineers, mechanics, and early pilots like me. We dreamed of a time when flying would be as safe as it is today. Engineers and mechanics worked together to build safer planes and to keep them running smoothly. And pilots shared all we learned about planes and those who built them. That way, they could keep improving planes for future pilots." What was your 1928 trip across the Atlantic like? Amelia says, "It was thrilling and a little scary. Many people disappeared or died trying to take the same trip. But Bill Stoltz was our pilot, and he was good. He flew us from Newfoundland to Wales in the United Kingdom. The flight was very cold. The plane's cabin wasn't heated like cabins are today. I had to wear a fur-lined suit over my clothes to keep warm." Why did you make that dangerous journey? Amelia says, "I wanted to be the first woman to take on the challenge. I was proud when I met my goal, and I don't want to brag, but others seemed proud of me too. After the flight, I was famous. People said I was like Charles Lindbergh, the first person to fly solo across the Atlantic. They even called me Lady Lindy, but I still wanted to prove myself as a pilot. I wanted to be the first woman to cross the Atlantic alone." How did you prepare for your 1932 solo trip? Amelia says, "I added more fuel tanks and a new engine to my plane. I practiced new ways of navigating through fog, and I packed my favorite foods, tomato juice, chocolate, and raisins. But I kept my plans a secret. I didn't even tell my family." Other female pilots were preparing to cross the Atlantic, and I didn't want them to beat me. What happened on the flight? Amelia says, on my way across the Atlantic from Newfoundland, I ran into a storm. Some of my equipment failed. The wings on my plane got icy. I had to fly lower into warmer air to melt the ice. But that put me close to the waves and water. Through it all, I stayed calm and kept on flying. Finally, I landed in a farmer's pasture in Northern Ireland. How did people react to your trip? Amelia says, I became even more famous. I gave speeches and lectures all around the United States. I spoke about aviation and women's rights. I was invited to dinner at the White House. President Herbert Hoover presented me with the gold medal of the National Geographic Society. This award goes to people who make achievements in geography or the study of where things are located. I was the first woman to ever receive that honor. What other records did you break during your life? Amelia says, my very first record was in 1922 when I was 25. I became the first woman to reach an altitude of 14,000 feet, 4,267 meters. In 1935, I became the first person to fly from Hawaii to California. That same year, I flew solo from Los Angeles to Mexico City, which no one else had done. Meeting all these challenges was very satisfying for a pioneering pilot like me. Are there any honors you are especially proud of? Amelia says, yes, the United States Congress awarded me the Distinguished Flying Cross in 1932. The medal goes to people who've showed heroism or achieved something special in the field of aviation. I was thrilled to get that award. That year, I also received a trophy naming me America's Outstanding Airwoman. I was really proud of that because I'd always wanted to show that women could be great at flying. I won that trophy for the next 2 years as well. That meant a lot to me. How did you spend your time when you weren't flying? Amelia says, I kept busy in lots of ways. I served as a nurse's aide in Canada during World War I from 1914 to 1918. I helped care for wounded soldiers. I worked with kids in Boston at a place called Denison House. That was a home where poor people could live or visit to get free milk or coal to heat their homes. Denison House had classes too. I taught kids English there. I loved it. After my flight in the Friendship, I wrote a book called 20 Hours, 40 Minutes. That's how long the trip took. I also wrote for newspapers and magazines. Later, I even designed a line of clothing. How did your life and work make a difference? Amelia says, after I made my flights, people saw that women could be pilots if they wanted to. They also saw that women could work outside the home. My speeches on women's rights helped other women believe in their dreams. They saw me following my dreams and it gave them the courage to follow theirs too. I hope both men and women can learn from my story that no dream is too big to chase. Here's a timeline of Amelia Earhart's life. 1897, Amelia Mary Earhart is born in Atchison, Kansas. In 1918, Amelia becomes a nurse's aide in Canada. 1920, Amelia flies for the first time as a passenger. 1921, Amelia takes her first flying lesson. 1926, Amelia moves to Boston and works with kids at Denison House. 1928, Amelia becomes the first woman to cross the Atlantic by plane. 1930, Amelia sets a woman's speed record by flying 181.18 miles, 291.5 kilometers per hour. 1931, Amelia marries her publicist and promoter George P. Putnam. 1932, Amelia becomes the first woman to fly solo across the Atlantic. 1937, Amelia and navigator Fred Noonan take off from Miami on an around-the-world flight. On the last leg of their trip, they disappear over the Pacific Ocean. Their plane is never recovered. Here's glossary. Altitude means height. Aviation, the study of flying an airplane. Cabin, the part of the airplane where passengers sit. Cockpits, places in the front of the airplane where pilots and the crew sit. Engineers, people who design and build machines or other products. Geography, the study of where things are located. Instructor, someone who teaches. Navigator, a person who sets the route on a trip. Many navigators use maps and special instruments to help guide them. Obedient, willing to do what someone tells you to do. Solo, alone. And I hope you enjoyed this book.